Hi, you're listening to Speaker Talks podcast for speakers, authors, entrepreneurs. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming a guest who's going to talk to us about speaking, about training, about leadership. And if you're wanting to learn about leadership, then Don Schmenke is the person who's going to help you do that. And it's really important that you understand that Don has the experience to be able to do that, right? He's an award winning speaker. I will read that for you. Researcher, founder, and the Saga Leadership Institute, and he has delivered more than 1,700 speeches. Now, I hope one day he'll catch up to me and be able to speak as often as I speak, right? That's the way it works. But anyway, Don, are you there?
Hi.
Hi, how are you, Don?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Hey, Don's out of Baltimore, Maryland. I'm out of Tampa, Florida, and soon to be out of Sebring, Florida, because we've sold our house and we're going to move into a 38-foot RV. Don, what do you think of that?
Wow, that's amazing. Good for you.
Going to try it for a couple years and see what we do. But
Sure.
Don and I connected, and he is obviously. Well, why don't you tell us about you, Don? How did you get where you are today?
I was doing planetary physics at MIT, and then I started getting fascinated with human grouping behaviors. That took me to Hopkins.
Wait. Back up. You got to slow down. You were doing planetary physics at MIT.
Yeah.
And then something else caught your attention.
Yeah, I was noticing humans. And,
Was one of them up there, or planetary? You said, "Hey, that looks like Bob."
no, I was studying the closest planet to us, which is the one we're standing on. And that's how I noticed. That's at Hopkins. I did studies in human grouping behaviors and how they administer. And so that is what got me into looking at what was going on. And I ran into a lot of executives in the executive MBA program, and they started complaining about leadership theory and organizational change theories and, the high failure rates. So I started studying that because they asked, could it be primal? Could it be biological? And so I began looking at genetic leadership and how our species evolved. And that's what led to my books and articles. And then I was asked to speak. So today I train about 700 CEOs a year. And then we work with a lot of companies in various industries to implement the research we've discovered.
That's really cool. And that's like you say. They wondered if it was genetics, and they wondered if it was this. And I'm one of those that says no. It was probably just training, wasn't it? just how you're brought up to be a leader, and then how you're trained to become a leader. I don't know, because one of my talks that I give is called "Great Managers Are Made, Not Born." So I would have, I know there's some leaders who are made to lead. I mean, they are, but most of us, 99% of us, have to learn how to do that, don't we?
Well, there are certain levels of skills that are helpful. So yeah, I mean, leadership training can be useful for having somebody understand behavioral styles or how to plan or things like that. But when it comes to issues around like intuition, sorry, I'm in a hotel here, so I'm not in my studio. Issues around like how to think intuitively are hard to train. How to look ahead 5 years when some people can only look ahead 3 months. How to inspire people for action. I mean, a lot of that. There are some natural leaders that just they get it. It happens. Entrepreneurs, as an example. I mean, it's if you have to have a willingness to take risk and feel good about that. Most people panic. They can't deal with the stress, and it's a total different experience. So a lot of that we have found is biological, is genetic, and
wow,
you can put somebody through an entrepreneur course for years, and they'll still not come out being an entrepreneur.
I do that with speakers. You put people say, I want to be able to do this. You say, well, we dig in for 6 months worth of speaker training, and at the end, you're like, nope.
Exactly. So skill training does work, but there's other elements where you either get it or you don't have it.
That's, you said intuition and other things, and one of the things, like you said, I was watching something the other day, and something went off, a bomb or a shot, a big loud noise is what they said, and it showed the video on Facebook, and all the people all through Times Square were taking off running. And
Hmm.
first of all, I'm a big. My wife always asks me, "How did you learn to do what you say, what you do?" Type thing. And I go, "Well, let's start off with if somebody shoots, what's the first thing I want to do? Is not run down the middle of the street because every time I see those movies where the people are running down the middle of the street, I went, that's so stupid. They wouldn't run down. Well, they do. They run down the
Yeah.
middle of the street as opposed to going into a store right
Right.
there and maybe locking the door, right? So
Yeah.
instead, they're running right down the center of Times Square because they heard a big bang someplace. And I'm one of those who says they probably didn't even hear it. A whole bunch of people came running and they took off running because, like you say, leadership is hard to find. And to me, it's panic creates so many problems. And that's what the leaders stop the panic from happening. Is that it?
Do leaders stop panic? I think leaders provide, what I find, we did a lot of research for thousands of years into different areas of culture and our species, how we learn to coordinate and govern ourselves. And I find that the greatest leaders inspire something we call a compelling saga. We stole it from the Vikings. In
No.
other words, it's a directional statement that inspires so much passion that people are willing to suffer and sacrifice for it.
Oh.
And so it's beyond your typical mission statement or why statement or purpose statement. It's really something that the greatest civilizations and companies actually had this thing. It was just a compelling saga where it generated passion, which actually had a belief shift for the people where they needed each other to achieve it. And we find that when a leader can inspire passion for something where, hey, we need each other or we will not be able to achieve this, and we're willing to suffer and sacrifice together, and it's going to require bravery and honor, that's a whole different management team. And when we implement these management teams in companies, their strategic execution rate goes up magnitudes. And so we've tested this with modern day humans in corporations. And so from that, we're able to measure the results and we're able to measure the modalities and what works and what doesn't. So it's been a fun journey taking that on
Oh, yeah. How long you been doing that now then?
since the 90s actually. And,
Okay.
you
Couple
know,
years.
yeah, a couple of years starting to get the hang of it. I've done probably, I've done
Well,
maybe 2,000 speeches recently. I mean, not recently, but over the years. And I've
yeah.
learned a lot from working with CEO groups.
That's just it. I tell people I've been speaking for 40 years, and what you learn along the way is phenomenal. Somebody will say something else, and somebody says this, and you start to delve into why did that happen, and how did that happen. And you might not do it at that speaking event, but you go home and start to look at it, and you start to go, well, how can that even happen? What makes that possible?
Yeah.
You did said something though too. You said something intuitive. Intuition is hard to teach. How do you improve people's intuition? Because I'm a real nutball, and we, as a society, we've allowed this intuition, this inner sense, to just disappear. And how do we get it back?
We challenge the beliefs. A lot of it is when we were faced with the 90% failure rate of strategic planning, we had to look into why was strategic planning failing. And we found a couple of things. Most strategic plans aren't strategic; they're
Oh,
tactical. So that's the
oh,
first problem.
most
Is we
people
have a
don't know that. Can you define the difference? Is it possible to do that real quick?
yeah, levels of thinking. Strategies more longer range patterns of complex thinking, where tactics is more near term. Year to year budget, year to year goals, and you certainly need that before you translate to operations. But the strategic stuff, when I was looking at companies that had outperformed their industry, and a lot of these were startups, a lot of these were new small companies that violated expert opinion, violated thought leaders, violated all the top management consulting methods, and yet in their lifetime ended up dominating their industry. And I was always curious as to how that happened. And that's what led us to looking at strategic planning and the failure rate. And most being tactics doesn't allow you to be strategically advantaged in the market. So we started looking at what does, and most episodes of success show they outmaneuvered the enemy in terms of their beliefs and their thinking. They out intuited the enemy, and I think that's real strategy. So strategy is about intuition versus analysis. You need the analysis later, but when I saw these companies totally outmaneuver their industry, and all the experts said they'll never make it, and then they did make it, and then the experts said, "Oh yeah, we knew they were going to make it."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They
Yeah,
never say, "Oh, how did that happen?" or "We were wrong." They always go, "Well,
yeah. Oh
of
yeah, I
course
knew
they
it.
made it. When
Yeah,
this
yeah,
when this happened, we knew they were going to make it." Yeah,
yeah,
like
exactly.
no.
Yeah, no. So I think so. We try to get to your question again. The invoking intuition isn't something you can do with an analytical model. So what we do is we try to challenge the current belief systems, and generally in three areas. The battlefield, because a lot of times no one challenges segmentation, but we do. It's like, why are you segmenting that way? Like, why is that correct? Because if your industry says so, maybe that's not the best way to do it. And then once you have that segmentation, you're able to look at, the market thrust vector, like which way are you going tomorrow, and then who's the enemy. So we found out the ancient principles, which is now defensible with modern medical science, of finding out, where's tomorrow's battlefield and who's the enemy there that's going to keep us from achieving success. Then allows a winning formula to develop. And that's really the whole thing about strategy is what does winning mean and how do we do it? So we take about 2 days off site with the CEO and the management team, and pretty much we can drill through that within the first day. And then the second day, move into critical success factors and implementation frameworks. But until you have that shift, you're not going out and maneuver anything. You know, you're going to be on par with everyone else, but you're not going to dominate.
But isn't that one of the greatest challenges we face? Is you said challenging their current belief system, and don't you find that everybody puts up a wall? I mean, a huge wall sometimes that says this is the way we've always done it. That works fine. We're not going to change it, and yet we're
Yep.
kind of failing as a company.
Yep. Yeah. So a lot of times we'll do interview for belief snapshots of an executive team so that way we can design that shift, because you can't just come in and say, well, you got to believe this differently. No, you have to
That's
have
right.
a level of Socratic inquiry to lead people to a shift in their own minds. And that's the art of it. And, but the companies that do this well are just really outperforming the rest. So when you look at the top companies today, that emerged in their industry, there was something that was different about what their beliefs were that drove their decisions to make different decisions than the rest of the industry.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenal thought. But you said something now for the speakers who listen to this and they go, "Hey, I would love to be able to travel the country and give leadership talks or whatever they want to do." And you said something that is really vital. And I don't think most people who are uh, haven't been in the business for a long time, they think I'm just going to go into a company and speak. And you said something about, well, you got to do your research, you got to do a survey, or you got to. What do you do in advance to prepare yourself and your company to give that presentation?
Well, a lot of times, like a CEO might bring me in to do a workshop for 3 to 5 hours, which is really sharing this research, how to do it, the case studies, how to double or triple your sales within 2 years, the bottom line balance sheet impacts. And then from that, if they want to seriously implement, then we'll do something more intensive. We'll go in and we'll do private interviews. We'll look at the current culture and the environment and get an idea of where the shift needs to be. And then from that, we're able to design a formal 2 day retreat experience. And it's wonderful. I mean, a lot of our clients have been with us for 7 to 10 years. We'll kick them off. They'll start growing. We'll come back and help them course correct and adapt. And then, yeah, it's been a fun journey because we learned so much too from working in the field with various industries. And we work from family businesses to startups to hired guns that are coming in to turn around a situation, and everything in between. But I think, when you go back over thousands of years, leaders always went through the same journey. You know, uh, what does winning mean? How do I do it? Who do I have? Who stays and who leaves? One of the models I use in the workshop is because I did a lot of mountaineering work and did some research in remote civilizations like in the Himalayas. And, sometimes you have to unrope people because they might have gotten you to the level that you're at, but they're not going to get you to the next level. And so they need to stay where they are. But if you pull them up beyond their level of competency, now you get a problem. And I'll ask CEO groups, because I've done about, like I said, 2,000 of these CEO groups. So I've trained about 20,000 CEOs. And when I say, how much time do you spend getting sucked into operations? Like 80% of the hands go up.
Wow.
And the thing is that, why you're getting sucked in is underneath of you, there's a weakness. And so you're doing someone else's job. And it's a painful discovery, but very useful because, then you look at what do I got to do to get my team stronger? Because, I can't be below deck rowing and bailing with everybody else. I've got to be on the upper decks. I've got to be able to look out to the horizon, see enemies approaching or adjusting the sails. I can't be below deck like that. So it's been really fun working with CEOs and in using science and medical protocols to look at how to change organizational performance and then measure the performance change in a dramatic way. So that's kind of what I write about, and always looking for new endeavors to research. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's great. While we got to pause, kind of, it's how do people get a hold of you?
Website is sagaleadership.com, SAGA, like the Viking saga, sagaleadership.com. And if you want to email me, I'm fine with that. I try to respond to all my emails. It's don@sagaleadership.com. So don@sagaleadership.com.
And you got a couple books out?
Yeah. I did the thing with Chris Warner on NBC for the K2 Summit. We actually wrote the book live called High Altitude Leadership. Well, my first one was back in the 90s with Oxford University gave me permission to use an ancient manuscript that they had from 700 years ago. So it was like a executive training program for the samurai. So I published the Code of the Executive back then, and it's still selling today. So it certainly has its own life.
Well, that's one of the things that I was just talking with somebody the other day, and they said, well, and we're still teaching this, and they said what it was, and it's like, well, and of course my job is to ask the question. So it was like, why do you think that is? And they went, well, I guess people still don't know it, and that's the answer. It's like parenting. To me, it's like parenting. If all the people understood what the best parents in the world did, then we wouldn't have any bad kids, and we'd have everything under control. Everything, but for whatever reason, the new parents don't necessarily know what the other parents knew, or the successful parent. And that's true with leadership. That's true with leading organizations. You come in and you supposedly learned for 5 or 7 years from a great leader, and then you go to step in and it's not working, and there's probably lots of reasons for it, but one of them might be just a weakness with you. One of them might be something you didn't know or didn't know how to enact. And other parts of it are because that leader had you as their backup, like you say, the person underneath them. You have somebody who might be a weakness, and you didn't know it until they're put into that position that you vacated. And so many times, so the leaders struggle to find the method, and they have to bring in somebody like Don to help them. That's the good news. We got people out there.
Yeah. And there's a lot of theories that hit the table which totally are not vetted, and people get, I call it tool seduction. Where we get tools are great and we need them, but when we get seduced by them, it can be very dangerous. And we came up with that concept when my co-author, Chris Warner, who's the top rescue climber in the world, was pulling dead bodies off of mountains. And we were looking at the dead, and they're all clutching their tools, and a lot of them died needlessly, he said. But what's happening is companies do the same thing. They die grasping their tools, and tools are great, but when you get seduced by them, they can take you down. So I always ask CEOs, you need tools, but are you using them, or are they using you? Are your people using the tools, or are the tools using your people? Because
most of them can't answer that, can they? They can't. They don't know that, do they?
Well, a lot of them do when they think like, oh, wait a minute, we brought this tool in because everybody thought it was hot. It was a great book, and everybody said it was cool to do, but then we had to redo how we were doing production, or redo how we were doing sales or development. And in the end, we got less productivity, innovation declined, I just had a culture of fragmentation as people were forced to use the system. That's an example of a tool using your people. And the failure rate of these tools are very, very high in those situations. So the best thing to do is you use the tool, meaning adapt it for what you need to produce those results. And you hear it. I'm sure you hear it all the time. People complaining about this new software they just put in. It's like,
Why do we
yeah,
have to do that? Yeah. Yeah, we've never had to do that before. I worked with a healthcare organization, and they were just livid. They were like, "Why do we never had to do that before?" And I looked at them. I went, "What are we referring to?" And they were talking about we have to enter in all this data. There's so much data, and I go, "What'd you do before?" And they went, "Well, we didn't have to enter that." I went, "Well, this gives you a lot bigger picture of what you're doing with that patient, doesn't it? And certainly the next person to come up on the patient now has this much more information, which we should have had all along." And they're like, "Well, maybe." They don't want to admit that this would be a good thing to have if we learned how to use it properly.
yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
there's, like you say, it's the tool forcing you to do something, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good.
yeah.
That's one of those situations where well, I use it in small business people here, and that's they say, well, if I would only get a CRM system, or if I would only get this system, then
Right,
I'm sure everything will work out better. And you're like,
right.
maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but you were a world-class mountain climber. Is that what you're trying to tell me on this whole stories?
I wasn't world class. I mean, I hung out with world class mountain climbers, but I wouldn't even put me in that category. I mean, I climbed. I mean, I really don't like climbing. I would do it to get somewhere or to learn something or to explore. But I mean,
Oh,
but I'm with guys that know what they're doing. They're the best in their field and they love it. And yeah, they keep me alive. But but I wouldn't put myself in that category.
well, it's and that just shows you're not ego driven. That's what's cool about that. Because some people they climbed 1/3 of that mountain and went, hey, I've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever mountain they might have climbed, and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, what it was like to get to the top, and they're like, well, we didn't get all the way to the top. The weather drove us back, but you're like,
Right.
quit it, just quit it. If you got to be honest with everybody too, because there's people like you and I who can sniff out BS, from people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's always, that's what I call intuition. When you hear people and when you watch people and when you see people, then you also get a feeling for that person of the genuineness of who they are and what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even worse, we're from working with people like Chris Warner. Some of these people that almost die, and then they come out and become motivational speakers. It's like, here I almost died on Everest. But when you look at their guides and the people that were leading them, the reason they almost died is they didn't listen. You know, they
Oh,
they
really?
yeah they got seduced by their tools, or they thought they knew everything and they did stupid things. Now on Chris Warner's expeditions, no one's ever died, and he's led probably a couple hundred of the most dangerous expeditions, including Everest. And yeah, this is what I learned from hanging around with people like him is that a lot of these people die needlessly. Like if they had just listened, they would probably still be alive, but they thought they knew better, and they almost died. Now they're a motivational speaker.
Yeah. Then they're out. Yeah. Now we've learned. Yeah. Well, but that's true of almost everything. When you're working with your people and I'm working with I had one person I tell the story all the time a few years ago, and she really wanted to be a speaker, and she had a book out and she wanted to tell her story. And I went, okay, well, let's put this together for you. And long story short, we weren't a month into it before she wouldn't listen to anything I had to say. It was like, well, I know it's your book and I know it's your story, but we have to tell it a certain way because just telling your story bores other people. I don't think
Right.
you get that unless you're talking about climbing Mount Everest or something. But for most of us, it's a story, and you have to find a way to tell it, right? And she just wouldn't. She wanted nothing to do with it. Wouldn't have anything. And I would like, we have a fundamental problem here, and I think I'm going
Yeah.
to have to not have you as a client anymore. And she was like, what do you mean? We agreed to this. So I went, here's your money. Here's the money back.
Uh,
We're never going to agree to disagree, and you're never going to listen to what I have to teach you. And that's the way it
yeah.
is, unfortunately, sometimes.
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you.
Thanks. But yeah, I'm sure you've had people, CEOs, who resisted hard, where you finally just had to say it has to be this way, or we've got to try it this way, or something, right?
Well, it's fortunately we've gotten better at selecting clients because we've had to give the money back several times over the years, and we found that it was the wrong selection. And I don't know what your experience has been, but it may be similar to mine. That if you have somebody that already knows everything, you can't work with them.
That's exactly it too, isn't it? How many times, and you as listeners then, listen up. If you think you know it, don't get involved because people are not going to like you because you're a know-it-all. And if you keep telling other people how to do it, they're not going to like you. The best way to do anything is to ask a question so that they might have an awakening of the person around. So
Yeah.
even if you know best, just ask them a question. I tell that all the time is you got to crack a window before you can open the door.
Right. Yeah, and I find that it's easier for us now that I've gotten older and made enough mistakes. It's that, our best clients are either the ones that are in pain because something's happened, profits aren't where they should be, growth has stopped. So there's some fear and discomfort. Those are great people to work with because they're willing to listen. The other end of the spectrum are what I call the enlightened group. In other words, they're killing it, they're doing great, but they know they can't slow down. They have to keep pushing the envelope, and we work with them. The people in the middle that are not enlightened or not in pain generally are poor clients for us because
Oh,
they're not in enough pain or enlightenment to call, but the ones that do call from those areas, I think are great to work with.
yeah, yeah. I think you've got it right there. That's again when I teach people how to be better speakers. If they're going to be selling from the stage, you have to say you have to find that the audience's pain point. You have to dwell on their pain, and people are like, "Yeah, but I got a story to tell." You go, it has to involve their pain. If you don't
Right.
find their pain, there's going to be no action. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's how
Mm.
everybody sells to you. Everybody markets to you. I go back to all the ads that are on TV. If you aren't using our product, you're not good enough to do anything, right? You don't
Yeah.
smell good enough. You don't look good enough. If you don't drink our beer, you're not going to meet the right girls, right? All that kind of stuff.
Right. Right.
So it's
So
tough. Well, so Don, this has been a real pleasure. We're coming up on 30 minutes, but tell
good.
us, everybody again, how to get hold of you.
Sure, you can certainly email me, and like I said, I try to get to everyone's emails. Don at Saga Leadership. That's Don at SAGA, then the word leadership.com. And of course, that's the website as well.
And is that where they can buy your book?
No, I would just go to Amazon or Barnes and
Okay.
Noble for that. Yeah.
And look it up by Don Schmenke.
Yep. It's
SCHMINCKE. Because some people will see it on video here, and some people will only hear it on audio on the podcast. So it's
oh
Don
yeah.
Schmenke. He calls it Schmenke. He's German, right? But it's SCHMINCKE. So if you just got your pencil out, SCHMINCKE, Don Schmenke on Amazon. And what are the titles of your books?
The ancient one, which was the Oxford project, is the Code of the Executive, and the one I did with Chris Warner is High Altitude Leadership.
High Altitude Leadership. Yeah, I might buy one of those for my wife. She's in upper management at one of the companies and always struggling with how to do this or what to do that because she wants to be liked and she hates to be
Mhm.
the bad guy. That syndrome, and it's tough because I do all kinds of stuff that says the reason so many things happen is because most people do not know how to deal with confrontation. They don't know
Yeah.
how to deal with difficult employees, right? Have you found that?
Yeah. Well, she's have her call me. I love to chat with her. But one of the tips that I have found, because it came up today, I was giving a speech to a bunch of CEOs this morning here in Orlando, and now I got to go to Dallas to do the same thing. But that comes up a lot. And I find that if you have a strategic foundation to stand on, then your conversation is strategically based, not personal. So as you discuss the changes or the potential conflict areas, and you can root it in like, here's why this is important, or here's why we have to make the change from a strategic winning viewpoint, it's a little bit easier than having an opinion argument with someone else.
Oh, yeah. That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And learning how to deal with that is critical. I tell a story all the time. I was doing a middle management for one of the major companies many years ago now, and I had 30 of the quote unquote middle managers in this organization in the room, and we were talking
Mhm.
about different stuff and how to handle things. And one of them said, "Well, what do you do when, your boss is this? I went, well, that we need to talk about that maybe some other time privately so we can really work it out. And some other guy raised his hand and he said, well, I have that same problem. I went, oh, I said, well, then maybe we ought to get to, and somebody else raised their hand and they said, I have that same problem. I went, I'm not understanding this. You all have a problem with your managers. And they went, well, it's the same person. And I went, I said, so you're all under the same manager? And they went, no. Bob was under Tom, and Tom's under Jerry, and Jerry's under the new manager guy.
Right.
And I went,
right.
and you're all having a problem there? Well, it turns out, and as we went through it in class a little bit, Bob had promoted the bad manager because he was the squeaky wheel and always doing it. Then the next guy promoted him. Then the next guy promoted him. Now he's the boss over all of them. They got a big problem. I went, well, you're probably not going to get rid of that guy.
Right.
So yeah, it's funny how lack of being able to deal with that difficult person or difficult situations work. Well, I'll tell you what, I probably will. Do I have your phone number? Because I'll probably have Kristen give you a buzz if that's all right.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. It's
Cool.
yeah, I'll give it to you now. It's 410-960-0442. So
410-960.
Yeah, 0442.
0442. 410-960-0442.
That's it.
Got it. Great. Yeah. Any good time if better to call in another?
It's hard to say. I'm usually rushing between airports or on stage. But leave a message. I'll get it when I land.
All right, cool. And in case you guys weren't listening really close, he says he's always busy as a speaker. What a problem to have, right? So you guys should tune in. You should certainly read about his book, especially if you're talking about training people on leadership. Learn from the best, and that's Don. And he will be glad to help you. Obviously, you can tell he's open to helping other people and wanting you to succeed. That's very important, right, Don?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, this has been Speaker Talks podcast, and we sure appreciate you hanging on. Make sure you click the link to subscribe and get on to the next podcast. We'll go from there. Don, been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.